Welcome to A Word for Wednesday. Thank you for joining us for a few moments this week. I've got a little story I want to read out of a great little book by C. Roy Angel, Baskets of Silver. He wrote 5 or 6 really great books that are probably in just about every preacher's library. And one of the best chapters from this book is entitled The Cross Pull. And he uses for his text Romans 7 and 19. Paul said, For the good that I would, I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. There is a pull inside of every human being. C. Roy Angel says, the words cross pull are not mine. They belong to an internationally famous radio commentator. And he doesn't tell us who that commentator is, but he says he was a guest in our city, and I had the privilege of eating lunch with him and some 8 or 9 businessmen. After the meal was over and he had discovered that I was a minister, he said, just a minute. I want to tell you a story, rather an incident from my own life. And this is in the words of that radio commentator. Years ago, when I was just a young fellow, I was out on a ranch in the West, a guest for a few days. There was a little bandy-legged cowboy on that ranch that was about the most heartbroken, miserable man I ever saw. He had reared a colt, and it had grown to be a big, fine stallion. He and that horse loved each other very much, and everybody teased that little cowboy about his love for that horse. It would follow him around like a dog. It was his pet. The horse had stepped in a gopher hole and sprained his ankle and had been put out in the big pasture while he healed. Some wild horses had broken in and then broken out again, and his favorite had gone with them. The cowboy was just miserable. The second evening that I was on the ranch, one of the other hands raced into the ranch yard as hard as his horse could run, yelling to the dejected little cowboy at the top of his voice, I found your horse! I found your horse! He is with a herd of wild horses not far from here down in the canyon. It was late in the evening, and so the little cowboy got set to go after him before daylight the next morning. I persuaded him to let me go along. We got up on top of the rim rock so we could look down the long canyon and decide how best to stalk his horse. We could see the horses grazing quietly, and I lay up on the rim rock on my stomach and watched as the little cowboy went down on foot. He did a beautiful piece of stalking until he was close enough for his voice to reach the horse. I saw him stand up, and I saw all the horses suddenly on the alert, their heads up. I knew he was talking to his horse for all he was worth. Then the herd bolted, all but one. One of them stood still, but he didn't know what to do. He looked at the other horses, and he took a step or two toward them. Then he looked back at the cowboy, pranced around a little, and then looked again. I could feel, this is the news commentator laying on his stomach on the top of the rim rock. He said, I could almost see the cross pull in that fine stallion. It must have been terrible. There was the master whom he had loved, and there was the wild herd with which he had run. Which way should he go? I thought for a moment the cowboy had lost. For the horse took a half a dozen steps or more, as if to catch up with the herd that were galloping away in a cloud of dust. Then he stopped and looked back, and with his head up and his neck arched, he trotted to his master. The cowboy put a rope around his neck, patted and caressed him, and I found out later he cried a little too. I could see the horse nuzzling the cowboy's pockets, and the cowboy reached into one of them and brought out a full lump of sugar. I was listening intently to the story when the well-known commentator looked straight into my face. Now this is C. Roy Angel speaking again. The commentator looked straight into my face and said, "Doctor, I laid my head down on my hands up on that rim rock and I prayed, 'Dear Lord, if I am ever tempted to run with a wild crowd in this life, oh Lord, let me listen to my Master's voice. Let me come back to Him.'" That was my prayer then. And that's been my prayer ever since. Now, beloved, C. Roy Angel says, that's a sermon in itself, not preached by a preacher, but by a radio commentator. And that's exactly what Paul is saying. There is a tug of war going on inside of me. It is a cross pull. The things I would not do, I find a pull to do. The things that I don't want to do, there's a pull inside of me. And the things that I want to do, there is a pull inside of me. It is a cross pull. You may have read the lines of English Tommy, supposed to have been written in World War I. The Padre says, "I'm a sinner." John Bull says, "I'm a saint." Both of them bound to be liars. For neither of them, I ain't. I'm a man, and a man is a mixture, right down from the day of his birth, where a part of I'm come from heaven, and a part of I'm come from earth. Wow, isn't that awesome? Cross pull. And I know we preachers, we speak often of that pull of the world, and we rightly warn about the pull of the world and the pull of sin. And I'm always disappointed when I see people, young people, middle-aged people, being pulled toward the world, pulled out to sea, as it were. And it seems like they don't realize they are drifting. So many things in life will pull you deeper, pull us deeper than we intended to go. But as a preacher, I want to also remind you, there's a pull of the Master. That tug on your heart that you feel tugging you to prayer, tugging you to God's Word, tugging you toward church and Christian fellowship, tugging you toward worship, tugging you toward that lump of sugar, the nourishment you need. Oh, that's the Master. That's the Master that has reared you from a colt. He knows that we are pulled towards self, towards sin, towards Satan. But He is pulling us in return. Oh, if we will come to him. If we will come to him, he will take us in his arms and love us like he always has. You know, that cowboy, he didn't beat his horse into submission. He didn't whip him when he got him home. He loved him. He was the prodigal son that he had pulled back home. Oh, I feel his presence so sweet here today. He pulls us. He pulls us. You know, I had the mistaken impression when I was young that when I got older, I wouldn't feel that pull towards Satan, but I still do. He still pulls on me. He still thinks he has a chance with me. And I'm flesh. He does. But I am so thankful for the pull of the Master, keeping me safely in his corral at home to work for his service. Thank God for it. That's our word for Wednesday. Thank you very much for joining us.